Messalina, the Roman empress under Claudius, became notorious for her sexual power and political ambition. From her early years as a young bride, she recognized power vacuums in the imperial court and used her beauty, intelligence, and cunning to manipulate the emperor, officials, and the elite. She cultivated sexual relationships to control politics, involving senators, merchants, and generals. Her nightly excursions to the Subura district and the palace brothel made her the center of a hidden power network where secrets and desire were tools of control. Messalina built a secret network within the palace, weaponizing sex and collecting information as currency. Religious festivals were sometimes exploited as a cover for decadent activities, forcing participants into complicity and turning allies and victims alike into instruments of political power. Her influence extended beyond the personal. The Roman elite became paranoid, creating a culture of suspicion and disrupting traditional social networks. Her children, Britannicus and Octavia, bore the consequences of her notoriety, suffering political persecution and dying young. After Claudius discovered her schemes, Messalina was executed. Rome conducted Damnatio Memoriae, statues destroyed, her name erased from documents, and every physical trace removed. Yet the extremity of her actions and oral tradition ensured her name lived on in history and legend. Her legacy prompted profound social and legal changes. Adultery laws were tightened, husbands' control over wives increased, and religious rituals were reformed to prevent abuses. Roman physicians studied her alleged extreme sexuality, laying the groundwork for theories of female sexual pathology in antiquity. Messalina became a literary and cultural archetype. From Roman historians, medieval morality plays, Renaissance writers, to modern fiction, she represents the cautionary figure of the dangerous, corrupting woman, with each era interpreting her story through its own lens. From danger of female power to misunderstood feminist icon. The psychological impact on participants and victims lasted generations. Some became libertines, others retreated into ascetic lives to purge guilt. Family, marriage, and Roman religious life were disrupted, contributing to the rise of stricter moral systems, including the growing appeal of Christianity, emphasizing purity. Her palace network, loyal freedmen and servants, enabled her manipulation of information. Real power lay not in titles, but in secrecy. Who knew, who feared, and who was complicit, all served her purposes. Her failure to fully control these key figures led to her death. Messalina's historical legacy endures. She symbolizes the fusion of sexual and political manipulation, showing that absolute power leads to societal destruction, and that extreme efforts to erase her memory were ultimately futile. From the Roman palaces to the modern world, her story warns of power, desire, and unrestrained ambition.
In the heart of ancient Rome, amid marble halls and shadowed corridors, a woman rose whose influence would shake the foundations of the empire. Valeria Messalina, empress by marriage to Claudius, navigated the intricacies of imperial politics with a combination of charm, intelligence, and an audacious boldness rarely seen in a world dominated by men. From the moment she entered the court as a young bride, she perceived the weaknesses and ambitions surrounding her, and she leveraged every opportunity to turn these to her advantage. Messalina's power was not merely symbolic, it was practical, meticulously constructed, and ruthlessly maintained. She formed clandestine alliances with officials, traders, and military commanders, weaving a web of influence that reached into every corner of Roman administration. Her ability to manipulate desire, scandal, and rumor allowed her to control both the powerful and the vulnerable. Where others sought open displays of authority, she excelled in subtlety, using whispers, secrets, and intimate knowledge as her instruments of rule. The palace itself became a stage for her strategies. Private chambers and hidden passageways allowed Messalina to monitor and manipulate events behind the scenes. Religious celebrations, public games, and ceremonial feasts occasionally became arenas for her machinations, where compliance was coerced and even the innocent were caught in the currents of her power. In this environment, loyalty was fragile, fear was a constant companion, and information was the most valuable commodity.
The repercussions extended beyond Rome's political sphere. Messalina's children, symbols of both continuity and consequence, suffered the burdens of their mother's notoriety. Political enmity and the shadow of her reputation influenced their fates, demonstrating how the deeds of one individual could ripple across generations. Legal reforms, including stricter regulations on marital conduct and the rights of husbands, reflected attempts to curtail the vulnerabilities her influence had exposed. Religious rituals were revised, emphasizing order and propriety, in part as a reaction to the moral transgressions of her court. Even as her life ended abruptly upon discovery of her schemes, and Rome attempted to erase her existence, the impact of her actions endured. Attempts to obliterate her memory through destruction of statues, erasure of inscriptions, and suppression of records were ultimately ineffective. Oral accounts, hidden manuscripts, and rumor preserved her legacy, transforming Messalina into a cautionary emblem of the perils of unchecked ambition and the intersection of sexuality and power. Over centuries, her story has been reinterpreted through the lenses of literature, morality, and cultural critique. Writers and historians have depicted her as both a dangerous corrupter and a misunderstood woman exercising agency in a restrictive society. Her narrative illuminates broader questions about authority, gender, and morality, serving as a reminder of the human capacity for manipulation and the consequences of wielding power without restraint. Messalina's life demonstrates that influence is rarely confined to formal authority. True power often resides in strategy, perception, and the capacity to exploit both opportunity and human weakness. Her legacy resonates not only as a historical phenomenon, but as a timeless study of ambition, control, and the vulnerabilities of those around her. From the marble corridors of Rome to the corridors of modern institutions, her story endures as a stark lesson. When desire, secrecy, and authority intersect without ethical bounds, the consequences reverberate far beyond the individual, shaping societies and generations in ways that history cannot fully erase. The shadow of Messalina's influence extended even into the private lives of Rome's nobility. Senators who had once considered themselves untouchable discovered that even the smallest indiscretion could be leveraged against them. Families were fractured as trust dissolved. Husbands suspected wives, and wives navigated the perilous balance between compliance and survival. The fear of exposure became a constant, shaping behavior long after Messalina's death. In this climate, alliances were transactional, loyalty was conditional, and ambition became inseparable from caution. Her network within the palace was both a marvel and a terror. Freedmen, servants, and confidants acted as intermediaries, collecting information, conveying messages, and enforcing her will. Each person in this web understood the stakes. A misstep could mean ruin or death. Yet paradoxically, many willingly participated, drawn by fear, opportunity, or the perverse allure of proximity to power. Messalina's skill lay in her ability to convert human desires, ambition, lust, envy, into mechanisms for control, turning every participant into both ally and hostage. Religious ceremonies and cultural rituals became instruments of her strategy. By blending the sacred with the profane, she created ambiguity that disoriented participants, making them pliable to her commands. The spectacle of these events, masked participants, exotic offerings, intoxicating wine, and whispered secrets, blurred the line between devotion and indulgence. It was in this liminal space that Messalina exercised her most formidable power, the capacity to reshape perception itself, making subjects question not only morality, but their own memories and judgments. The psychological consequences were profound. Children raised in households touched by her influence grew into adults haunted by shame and fear. Some, embittered and rebellious, pursued libertine lives that mirrored the chaos they had witnessed. Others retreated into asceticism, seeking redemption in self-denial. Across Rome, these ripples of trauma manifested in subtle yet persistent shifts in social behavior, cultivating a culture of secrecy and moral caution that would linger for generations.
Messalina's downfall, though violent and dramatic, did not erase her legacy. The execution and the subsequent Damnatio Memoriae, destruction of statues, erasure of records, and the silencing of witnesses were attempts to obliterate the influence she had amassed. Yet history proved resilient. Stories survived, whispered in taverns, recounted in private homes, and later recorded by historians who marveled at the audacity of her schemes. In this way, Messalina became immortal, her narrative evolving from historical account to legend, shaping perceptions of female power, ambition, and corruption across centuries. Culturally, Messalina's story served as both warning and fascination. In Roman literature, she became the archetype of the dangerous empress, the embodiment of unchecked desire and political cunning. Medieval dramatists used her as a moral lesson against vice and female overreach. Renaissance writers explored the complexities of her agency, questioning the balance of morality and circumstance. In the modern era, scholars debate her motivations: victim of circumstance, calculated strategist, or sociopathic manipulator. Each interpretation reflects contemporary anxieties about gender, power, and morality. Her life and legacy also illuminate the mechanisms of political power in Rome. True authority often resided not in titles, but in access, knowledge, and the capacity to manipulate information. Messalina exploited this dynamic with precision. She understood that fear, secrecy, and complicity were more powerful than laws or decrees, and she built a system in which every participant had a vested interest in maintaining her influence. Her failure to fully control key figures, however, proved fatal, demonstrating that even the most elaborate schemes are vulnerable to betrayal and miscalculation. Ultimately, Messalina exemplifies the duality of human ambition, the capacity to innovate, organize, and exert influence, intertwined with the capacity for destruction, manipulation, and moral transgression. Her story remains relevant because it transcends the specifics of time and place. From imperial Rome to modern institutions, the dynamics she exploited, lust, ambition, secrecy, and desire, remain potent forces. Messalina's narrative is a stark reminder that when power is concentrated, unchecked, and intertwined with human desire, it can create legacies of both awe and terror,
shaping societies long after the individual has vanished.
After Messalina's death, although the personal and political devastation had ended, her influence continued to simmer across all levels of Roman society. The secrets she had gathered and the relationships she had manipulated left a web of fear and suspicion throughout the palace and noble households. Princes, senators, and wealthy merchants calculated every word and action, knowing that their past could be exposed or exploited at any moment. This obsession with power and desire turned into a culture of constant vigilance, where loyalty was measured by silence and obedience. Moreover, people began to see female power in a completely new light. Messalina had demonstrated that in a society dominated by men, a woman could still manipulate an empire through intelligence, beauty, and strategic cunning. This lesson was remembered by future empresses, many of whom acted cautiously, concealing their influence to avoid punishment. Socially, the religious festivals and traditional rituals that Messalina had corrupted left lasting wounds in Roman spiritual life. Citizens sought stricter, more transparent religious forms, which contributed to the rise of moral movements and the growing appeal of Christianity. Young participants forced into her schemes carried deep psychological scars, forming a generation both resentful and wary, yet susceptible to manipulation in the future. Meanwhile, Roman historians, philosophers, and writers continued to use Messalina's story as a cautionary emblem of absolute power and unbridled desire. Statues destroyed, documents erased, and every physical trace could not erase her presence from collective memory. It was precisely the attempt to obliterate her that made Messalina immortal, serving as a model for subsequent generations of the dangers of power and seduction.
Her legacy influenced culture, law, and medicine. Adultery laws were tightened, husbands' control over wives was reinforced, and religious rituals became more strictly monitored. Roman physicians studied her alleged extreme sexuality as a way to explain female physiology and psychology, laying the foundation for theories of women's sexual behavior that persisted for centuries. Messalina became not just a historical figure, but a cultural archetype. Across eras, she has been interpreted differently. In the Middle Ages, as a warning against female ambition, during the Renaissance, as a symbol of power and moral corruption, in modern times, occasionally as a misunderstood feminist icon. Her name consistently reflects society's fears, expectations, and prejudices at each point in history. Ultimately, Messalina's story is a permanent reminder: absolute power, when combined with unchecked desire and ambition, can destroy both the individual and society around them. The lessons of the Roman Empire remain relevant today. Greed, secrecy, and manipulation still exist in modern power structures, only the methods and technologies have changed. Through her story and legacy, Messalina continues to embody temptation, authority, and catastrophe, warning every generation about the consequences of wielding power and desire without restraint. Conclusion. Messalina's life and death reveal a timeless truth. Human ambition, sexuality, and the pursuit of control can be forces of both influence and destruction. Her story transcends time, illustrating the fragile boundaries between power and morality. The empress is gone, yet her shadow lingers, teaching the world that absolute authority and unbridled desire, if left unchecked, leave scars not only on those who wield them, but on entire societies. Her legend is a mirror reflecting humanity's eternal struggle with temptation, corruption, and the consequences of crossing the limits that define civilization.